Welcome everybody. You're in for a treat. I This is Ryan Orrock, and I just wanted to give a little introduction for Jason today. Um, when I first got to the Bay Area a couple years ago, I thought I was pretty good at marketing, thought I was pretty good at sales, and even though I met Jason and he was totally cool, I did not really bother to listen to what you're about to hear today for another year. Now I've been working with him for an entire year, and every time he opens his mouth, I learn something important and deep. And he's completely transformed my entire understanding of not only marketing, not only sales for healers, but really how I can be coaching and serving my clients better. And so I'm working with him constantly on doing that. He's a very deep well with lots of wisdom on all sorts of topics. The marketing and sales part is just a piece, but working with him is really a life-changing experience. He's worked with some of the most powerful people that I respect the most in my community in sexuality and healing, like Dustin Garrick or Triambika. And they credit a lot of their success to working with him. And so that was one thing that really impressed me about Jason. He's got long-term connections with people who are really making a difference in the world, and that's the most important thing to him too. He's working for the evolution of humanity through what it is we do. And just as a last point, I mean, I've probably visited, I don't know, a half dozen other people's webinars or live events or that are also doing similar things. And compared to Jason, it's just not as deep. It's not as foundational. It's not as deep. Some of these people haven't been doing as long as he has. Some of them are just don't have the experiences he has in life, which you'll probably hear about, that have formed him and made him into an amazing guy. So so he's my favorite, and I learned a lot. I hope you enjoy. He's smiling. I hope you enjoy today as much as I do, and I hope you come further on the journey, which has taught me and so many other people so much. So with that, take it away, Jason.
Thanks, Ryan. That was a lovely introduction. I'm your favorite, huh?
You're my favorite.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, and thank you all for being here, whether you're on the call or whether you're watching the recording later, or both. And I want to make today a really great call for you. So, call, still stuck in the vernacular. Great webinar, great video, whatever we want to call this thing. Great meeting. I don't know. So how that's going to work today is first of all, we're going to go over the stuff that was promised to you, of course. I'm going to also demystify what a six-figure practice means, talk about, how to actually do that, and what are the nuts and bolts of actually building it. What do the numbers mean? What do you have to do every month? That kind of stuff. Usually people are, I'll say, relieved when we really simplify it down to, you need to, sign this many clients to this kind of thing at this price. And, in 6 months, you're on pace for a six-figure practice. And it really sets people's mind. Now, how to do that, that's a whole other thing. And there's while the systems are simple, as Ryan will tell you, there's a bunch of little nuances, and some more and more come out largely because when I started doing this business full time about 10 years ago, I'm 44 now, and when I was 25, I tried to hang my coaching plank out. I was an NLP master practitioner. Nobody was teaching sales and marketing for practitioners at the time and healers. And even still, there's very few. 5 years ago, there was maybe 3, I think. And now there's a little bit more choice in the marketplace. And I just look at that. I don't look at that as competition, by the way. I look at it as different styles. And, you may be interested in a different style than mine, which is great. We want you to have a guide that fits your style. But I hated sales. I thought sales was horrible. I was looking at neurolinguistic programming as a science and, all this stuff. But I just couldn't communicate it effectively in a way that people understood how it would serve them, which to me is really what sales is about. But back to today, first of all, there's a few things that you can do that will help yourself get the most out of today. And here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover mistakes you're probably making. Those will be peppered in. I don't want to, start off with this list of mistakes you're making. Occasionally I'll mention one or two or three. We may get up to all six, although now I think there's 9 or 10, but we'll get there. And then the core of it will be 3 critical components for your success. And when we say success in this context, what we mean is that you're making over $108,000, and you're doing it with clients, by the way, who you feel fulfilled working for. We don't want you working with just anybody. We want you working with people that you like and that you know that you can help. If you're, excuse me, if you're working with people, either you're trying to, fit a square peg in a round hole. In other words, you think you can help them, but you're not quite sure. We don't want you doing that. And if you're certain you can help them, but you have a sense about them that you're just not quite sure what it is, but you don't feel you should be working with them, we want you to listen to that. It's never worth it. And then we'll talk about 2 secrets that all practitioners know. And if I forget any of that, please let me know. We'll see how the veracity of this series of PowerPoint slides, which I rewrote this morning, so you're in for a treat. So here's how to get the most out of today. How to get the most out of today is to do 4 or 5 things. Well, the first is to ask questions. My request is that you use the chat window to do that, because then you can ask them at any point and I can review them occasionally. Now, if you happen to be on the call as a result of being on the telephone, then feel free to just unmute yourself and ask, but do that at a point where I'll be asking it, does anybody have any questions? And I usually am pretty generous with making sure that we have some time for you to, unmute yourself and figure that out. If you're on a telephone, please mute yourself now. I've got you all muted when you come in. If you're on a telephone, actually, I don't even know how to do that. Unmute you if you're on a telephone, but I'll look occasionally. If you're unmuted and you're on a telephone, please use the mute function on your telephone until you have a question to ask. There's lots of background noise. Maybe you're doing dishes. Maybe you're, who knows what you're up to. But for the benefit of the other callers, please make sure your telephone is muted. I've muted you all upon entry on the web, but I've also given you the power to unmute yourself. So just be mindful of that. You can unmute yourself, but please re-mute yourself if there's anything else going on in the background. Even if there isn't, there could be feedback from the speakers, things like that. But the chat box is the best way for you to send me a question. The second thing you can do is you can ask questions. The more questions you ask, the more stuff will come out of that deep well that Ryan talked about. In fact, later on, in about 6 weeks, we're going to be doing 2 full webinars that are it's just going to be questions. I'm going to call them Troubleshooting Your Practice. And I'll, of course, encourage you to be on there. I'm going to lay out the whole system for you first, though, so that you can have some practice with it. And, whether we ever meet each other again or not, I want your business and your life to be transformed for the better. Of course, I'm going to talk about the course that's coming up in April at the end of this, or begins in April. So be prepared for that. That is one of the reasons I do these free webinars. One is, of course, to provide value to you such that your life or your business is transformed for the better. The other is obviously to market courses and services and things like that. So that's the second thing you can do, is you can ask questions. Now, the third thing is you can also ask questions. I encourage you to ask questions. Fourth is take notes. And I encourage you to do it by hand, not necessarily on a device, partly because it'll get deeper into your neurology. Now, I'm not attached to that. I don't think I've written a full sentence except for on a whiteboard in a decade. So if I had to take notes by hand, I wouldn't be able to read them. Sometimes I have trouble reading the whiteboard 10 minutes later. So, I empathize with the digital only folks. Just make sure your keyboard's not clacking in the background. Again, be mindful of the mute. And then here's the fifth thing. Keep your mind open, but, of course, keep it working. But a lot of times people are asking, does this fit my business or not? And I'm going to encourage you to ask a different question. And that is not whether or not it can help your business or whether or not it fits your business or will work in your business, but rather how it could or how it does or what you would need to do. Sometimes there's slight customizations, but the system's all out. It worked for everything from people who work in Tantra and BDSM to, executive coaches. So the business is a business, in the helping industries where you're moving people through stages, and you're working with them long term, then it can work for anybody. Sometimes you need to add a step to the sales system, and that's the benefit, of course, of being on troubleshoot your practice calls, or of course being in the course. But for the most part, the systems at a meta level structures business is business. Now, I will say that this business that we're in, helping people one-on-one, is very different than others. And I've seen a lot of people try to take a sales system from another business, something else. Maybe it's, selling corporate consulting or cars, or, who knows what it is, but it's different than this business. And there's something about those systems that don't seem to gel really well. So just going to caution you with that. You want to that anybody who you engage with has actually been in this business, whether you work with me or you work with somebody else, it really doesn't matter. Just make sure that they've been in this business and they're not just trying to apply their sales skills they learned somewhere else to this business, because it often doesn't work, and the results are pretty low. I'm actually not going to talk about myself a whole lot today. I know Ryan said maybe you would hear about some of my life, partly because, there's a recording, there's a 20-minute recording. But what I will say is a couple of transformative events. And the first thing is that, by the age of 19 or 20, I was in prison for my third felony right before the 3 strikes law in California. And the 3 strikes law passed while I was in. By the way, I had a hobby of stealing brand new sports cars off car lots. That's why I was in prison. And the third time I got caught, the judge says, Mr. McClain, how come you're not in prison yet? And I said, I don't know, Your Honor. He said, well, you're going this time. And I said, I understand. And somebody in there doing life handed me a book called Awaken the Giant Within by Anthony Robbins. And that, I knew I needed to change because I really didn't fit in. It's a whole subculture, and they accept that they're going to be back. There's an 89% recidivism rate, or there was at the time, it was 89%. And I was committed to being that 11%, but I didn't know how, that 11% that never came back, which means not violating parole or anything else. And there was, of course, a few other things along the way, perhaps the most transformative being my divorce in 2002 or 3. And at that point, I had just had to ask myself, what does all of this make sense for? And there's some other gritty stuff. There's, HIV, of course, and my father committing suicide, and there's a bunch of other things. But for the most part, what would have all of this make sense? And for me, it was contributing to the evolution of the planet for a couple of reasons. One is to liberate people, to free them emotionally and egoically, to just have them be free. The second, of course, is to make it a more hospitable environment for those of us who are free. That's a whole webinar right there. But keep your mind open, keep it working, make sure that you're looking for how it can. And man, if you can't figure it out, ask me, because I will be able to customize it. I've made several customized sales systems for businesses and individuals in different types of industries, whether it was web consulting or a bunch of different businesses. So first, let's just jump into demystifying the 6-figure practice. What does it take? Here's what it takes. It takes you signing 2.5 clients a month to a 3 or 6 month agreement, which means 12 or 24 hours at the rate of $150 an hour. And if you do that every month, in 6 months, you'll be on pace, or in business, they call it a run rate, to make $108,000 a year in the following fiscal year. So if you don't know what a run rate is, it simply means if you take a snapshot of where you are right then and you just project that out, then that's what you're going to be making. Can it be done faster? Sure. But it doesn't have to be. Can it be done slower? Definitely, especially if you don't do the things that you're supposed to be doing. So how? How? By the way, on these numbers, in the Bay Area, those are standard. $150 an hour is a good beginning rate for somebody who's skilled. So, I've coached plenty of people who are charging $500 an hour. So these numbers work out at $150 an hour. So it's a really easy entry level for you. If you've got some experience, and again, this is in the Bay Area, I talked to somebody in rural Canada at one point, and they said there's absolutely no way they could charge more than 80 American dollars an hour. Like that was incredibly high. They were in rural Canada. I didn't know that marketplace. You could still have a six-figure practice if you needed one in rural Canada. Maybe you don't need one in rural Canada. I don't know what the cost of living is there. But 100, 6 figures is a nice, good baseline. Can it be more than that? Of course. Anyway, that's how the numbers work out. And signing 2.5 clients a month, when you think about that, really doesn't seem that difficult. The devil, of course, is in the details. What are you setting them up for? How many people are you coming into contact with? What are your conversion rates? How many of them are actually signing on to work with you and get into your office for an exploratory session? All of those things. But for the most part, this is pretty simple, and it's really easy if you know how, if you have some system in place. So let's discuss the how. There's 3 components and one organizing principle to build a 6-figure healing practice. And the first and the organizing principle is to be a living example of the work that you do. For the most part, you want to have that area of your life handled. If you are, healing sexual trauma, let's make sure that you're at a relatively, healed level yourself. If you're working with, say, smoking cessation, if you're a hypnotherapist, let's not be chain smoking or have some other addiction you've replaced it with. Let's have that relatively resolved. If you're obese, don't be teaching weight loss programs. Those kinds of things, should be obvious. Don't be coaching relationships if you're resentful around women or around men. I've seen relationship coaches who are just, they've got this thing and it ends up not serving the client, because rather than having them take responsibility, you start commiserating with them, or just validating their viewpoint rather than asking them where they're responsible. There's just a bunch of reasons why it's a bad idea. Not that you can't ever help somebody in an area that you haven't mastered yourself, but I usually let them know, look, this is an area I'm still working on, and here's, if you're interested, here's what I know works, and like that. And then there's just a few areas it's just they're better off if I say that's not my area. It's not something I do, that I feel confident in. It's fine. In fact, they usually really appreciate that. I also pre-frame that's, I set that context that if there is an area that I feel is just not my area, I'll let them know that really early on, so that they're under no delusions about whether or not I can assist them in that area. It's clean, it's clear, it's responsible. It's really all good things. The second, or the first component, is to have a comprehensive offering or series of sessions. And then to have a sales system is the next component, and just to actually use it. A lot of people have them and they stick them up on the shelf like that book they bought. They got this stack of books. They have a stack of different systems, and then things get confusing too. But if I don't care what system you use. If you use one that works for you, use it. Rely on it. Part of that should be formalized referral systems. I offer a $500 referral fee. If you refer somebody to me who signs up with me for 6 months, it's incredibly generous, but I'd rather pay you than pay, say, a juggernaut like Google. Not that there's anything wrong with Google. I love them for certain things. But I'd still rather give you $500 and say, spend, that on a couple of press releases, which are also very useful. But then the person you care about gets the change they've been looking for. You get some money, and I know that it's effective marketing, because obviously there's immediate results. And then the third component is that you have to provide free, accessible value, like today, like this webinar. And the bread and butter, of course, will be your evening talks, which, by the way, is one of the secrets that all successful practitioners know, is that you have to You know, if you have to be presenting, if somebody comes to me and they say, gosh, I'm not making enough money. I don't think this is working for me. I don't have enough prospects. I have one question. I say, oh, when's the last time you gave a presentation? And they go, oh, it's hilarious. And I know that myself. If where's the first place did I do a presentation this month? If the answer is no, then it's pretty simple to troubleshoot, where I need to increase my productivity. And sometimes, by the way, you won't get any prospects from the event, but just that you're putting yourself out there. It's like, it's like if you watch a football, any sporting event, there's all these logos, around the track or around the court or around the field. Now, nobody goes to a football game and goes, oh, I need to go buy some Nikes, right? They don't do that, but it's just always ever present. They're at the mall and they're like, oh, maybe I'll go look at those Nikes. But it's not so direct. It's much more subtle than that. So, and you're also just putting energy out there. You're putting yourself out there. Somebody's going to see something, and it's going to be effective for you, whether you actually get clients from it directly or not. Having said that, it's the quickest way to get prospects is to do a talk. Questions so far? Occasional audio disruption. Are other people experiencing that? Let me go ahead and review these questions for a second. The PowerPoints will be provided for you if you register. If you're here, the PowerPoints are provided for you, or if you're not here and you're registered. How many clients do you end up seeing per week? How many hours a week by the end of it? Well, I don't actually know the answer to that question, but what I will say is I don't advise anybody to have more than 15 to 18 clients per week and seeing them in single-hour sessions. I, at one point, got up to 23 or 24, completely broke my body. Because you're not just seeing them for the hour, right? You're thinking about them for the hour. You're preparing for them a half hour before. You're maybe clearing yourself out from them a half hour. I have a half hour in between every client, pretty much no matter what, even if they're on video or that's just what my nervous system needs. But if you do more than, so 15 is considered full. I'll just say that. And that's a great question. How many times a month do you see each client? I endeavor to see them an hour a week. Now, that doesn't always work. Sometimes, well, it does in the beginning, but sometimes, what they really need is they need a half hour once a week, or they need 2 hours once every 2 weeks, or it just depends partly on what service you're providing, partly on the client's life. What's important is that there's continuity, there's regularity. You take 3 or 4 weeks off and there's just something else that you have to deal with. You have to sort of reset connection. You have to, find out what the heck's going on in their life. They've probably made the mistake of not reaching out for you when they had all these thoughts going on and they've gone down some tunnel, or they just forgot certain frames, or, whatever the case may be. Any other questions right now? Ryan, can you hear me okay? Okay. I'll get to the question about billing. Oh, great. Body workers. Okay. So there's a few differences with body workers. First of all, I wouldn't hire anybody to touch my body if they hadn't touched it, right? So generally speaking, you're like people who don't do hands-on work, and the system really does need to be altered. For people who do hands-on work, what you need to do is you need to add an additional step to the sales system that you'll see in a couple of weeks. I'll be doing a webinar on the actual sales system. And all that is pre-framing that, you're going to do the session, but then, you're going to get them some tea. You're going to want to get them out of the zone that they're in. You want them to be awake and alert. You don't want them to be in a trance or blissed out when they're reviewing an agreement. Why? Well, it's borderline unethical, first of all, I assert. And there's a danger that they will have buyer's remorse 3 hours later. You don't want that. There's really two areas in which you don't want buyer's remorse, and one of them is when people give you a lot of money. I think we all know what the other one is. You just want to make sure they're making the decision with a clear mind. And that means, and they might have to take a walk around the block, or that's fine. Get them some tea, get them a big glass of water, make sure they drink it. If they need to, ground themselves, great, have them do that. Just want them to make sure that they're alert. You do want it to be done in the same day, though. So, you don't want to do that and then have them meet next week, because then they've moved on probably for a lot of stuff. Yeah, that'll make a little more sense later, James. He's asking, what do I, before what? Before what? Before you have a formal conversation about working for an extended program. So, and this will become a little more clear in a minute, I think. So I think I'm going to move on and return back to it if it's not answered. How does one break into the scene for the first time? It's a great question. So I'm assuming that you mean sort of announce that you're doing this, or sort of like you don't have any clients at all and you want to announce. You simply do that. This is I don't know if for those of you who follow me on Facebook, I did this video a couple days ago, inspired by Katie Rubin, of just sticking an iPhone in front of myself and talking for a bit. And what I was talking about was just telling the truth about marketing. And so what's really great about telling the truth about marketing is, first of all, it's easy. So you just say, you can share some of your experience too, your emotional experience. So, I'm sort of nervous about this, but and suddenly you're a human and people are listening and engaged. So, I'm sort of nervous about this, but I've got this new offering I've designed, and, I'm offering, a complimentary exploratory session, and then you just pump them into the sales system. But, telling the truth. Now, the reason in the first weekend of actually, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm gonna circle back to that. Ruby, would you be willing to send me a chat text in a bit about emotions and self-esteem? Thanks. Okay. So much fun. Designing a comprehensive offering. So you cannot. I'm gonna say you cannot. Not in this shorter period of time, and maybe not at all. It might take you a few years. You could perhaps do it, but I'm going to say that you can't do it without designing a comprehensive offering. What is it in that sentence? Doing it? Make over 6 figures. It's virtually impossible to go session by session. Now, a lot of people have this stuff in their head about whether or not somebody's going to sign up for 3 months or 6 months. I find it's incredibly, first of all, I've never had somebody, that's not true. I had one guy who said, well, this is about trusting each other. I want to go session by session. I had enough experience at that point where I went, no. Here's the thing. Clients get sustainability of change with an extended offering. They get permanent transformation. They don't just feel better for a few days or a week, or they actually get permanent integrated transformation or change or evolution. You've all been to a weekend workshop that's supposed to transform your whole life in a weekend, right? And it did for until Wednesday, or maybe it lasted a week, or maybe it lasted 3 weeks. But the only way those are effective is if there's some support around the stuff that you learned. Maybe there's a co-coaching group, or maybe there's ongoing one of the things we'll be offering after the course, for healers, it will be an ongoing support group. It'll be very inexpensive because we want you to, have access to bi-monthly webinars or however we design it, so that the distinctions, because you're going to forget stuff, partly because of the volume of material I will provide for you. And partly because stuff, won't make sense until later, and partly because you just forget, or you get in your own head, the habit patterns of your mind start to take over, all of those things. But your clients get sustainability of change, and they're fully in the process and committed to the process. That's a big deal. They don't have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Right? Somebody signs an agreement for let's say 12 sessions for a bodywork package, right? And you talk to them about the 3 stages that they're going to go through. First is to get them, I want to make all this up. Let's say it's to get them out of pain first, and then the second is to get them some mobility, right? Increased mobility. And then the third is to have them feel just fully alive, right? There's just 3 phases that somebody could go through with an excellent body worker that also is working with nutrition or something like that. So and by the way, we'll dedicate half a webinar to designing a package. So that's actually coming next in 10 days. But the other is you get to hold the constant context for change and transformation. And you get financial sustainability. They get sustainability of change. You get financial sustainability. You can act, and that also, by the way, it doesn't just serve you, it serves them, because you get to relax into thinking about what they need several sessions in advance, and really, relaxing into not, are they going to be back or not next week, and concerned about their health, or concerned about what they were thinking about, or, good Lord, any number of things that we get concerned about when you come into our office and leave. It's like, I had a client who was referred to me last week because he was having debilitating panic attacks in presentations. I mean, debilitating, right? Like almost passing out, debilitating. And he's really good at presenting, and he's a solid guy, and there's no reason for it. And so, well, great. I think we can get this in 4 hours. It's not something I normally do, but the person that referred me, they're married, and I had worked with her for 6 months. So, I went ahead and did that. And then he had a presentation the next day. I said, that's perfect, right? And then he goes out, he disappears. He's not returning. I said, how did it go? Did you use this practice and, that, how'd you, and so then of course I had to, I do exactly what I teach, was just, I made up a bunch of funny interpretations. Like, it went so well, he doesn't even, he doesn't need me anymore. Or he got kidnapped by clowns, or I don't know, who knows what, right? And it went fine. He'd just been slammed. He'd been busy, and, he's still busy. He's sort of working 12 hours a day right now. That's great. But we think about them all the time. That's fine if you're in an agreement for an extended period of time. I'll say you're getting, compensated for your care in a way that makes a lot of sense. But those 2 things, the belief that maybe less people will sign up, I've just not found to be true. Especially if you present a framework. They're like, oh, thankfully, you know what you're doing. Like, they actually see you as more competent, and they trust you more if you have a framework in place that they can step into. There's a beginning, middle, and end also. In some cases that doesn't work. I mean, my chiropractor, I've been seeing him forever, but that's another matter. So what I'll say is the concerns about that. Now, it's a leap of faith. When I first got told, hey, you need to, I had a mentor, and I had just left my wife, and knew I couldn't do anything else. I had to be doing this, but I had no idea about comprehensive packages. This is 13 years ago. And he says, well, you just need to sign people up for 6 months. And I said, well, what do I do in 6 months? And he goes, well, stuff's just coming up every week. And I said, I can't do that. That's, I'm not going to do that. I need some sort of, because it's just the way I think. I said, I need some way to justify the 6 months. I need a beginning, middle, and end. Here's, phases or whatever. Now, it took me about 3 weeks for it to finally pop, because of the, I'm sort of a geek about integral theory and understood stages of development. And I studied so many things that finally it just all went, and I was able to place it into one context, one cohesive context in the personal evolution package. don't, by the way, hold yourself accountable to, I'm warning everybody now because I've gotten so much feedback, real world feedback, that going from zero or session by session to 6 months is quite a leap, unless you're a genius at systems thinking. So what and certainly you're not going to be able to do it in a few days. I mean, I was lucky enough to have been exposed to material that dealt with those kinds of frameworks, and it still took me 3 weeks to see the obvious. So, and it evolved from there. So I'm recommending everybody, develop a 3-month or 12 session package. It's a nice, easy, it's 3 months. Each month is a phase. And what will organically happen is you'll end up coming up against the limits of that. And you'll realize, gosh, they also needed this. And pretty much everybody also needs that. And they also need this. They also, like, if you're working with structure and nutrition, you'll realize that maybe everybody needs to do a colon cleanse first, or who knows what it is, but you'll end up adding stuff in. So just know that it'll grow organically. I know people who only work with people in a year-long agreement. Now I'm not sure I want to, commit to a client for a full year, to be honest. So I've stuck with 6 months. And that ends up, by the way, usually being 7 or 8. That's the way it works out, because people get sick, people travel. And so bear that in mind. Okay. Let me look at your questions here. Yeah, we can talk. Sorry, it's not really a question. We can talk about it. Yeah, great stuff. Great stuff, James. Good. So prepayment. A couple of people have asked about prepayment. What I do is I offer roughly a 10% discount for payment in full in advance for 6 months. And people take advantage of that. It's a sizable number. It's not, so large because my rates are relatively reasonable. I found that anything over $300, people are going to go for in terms of discount. Maybe it's $250, but and then it ends up you can communicate in terms of sessions. They're getting a couple of free hours, or they're getting a free hour, or whatever that is. They understand that if they have the resources, generally they go for it. Frankly, I prefer payment plans, not because I'm making more money, but because it helps me manage my income and just more regular. And I leave the clause in the agreement because there have been a couple of times where, it saved my bacon. Some unexpected expense came up, some huge unexpected expense came up or something. And, suddenly somebody walks into my office and, writes me a check for however much it is. And it's a relief. So I keep it in. It's a complicated one. We'll talk about pricing at some point. I'm going to move on for now, but we'll talk. What I will say is that, there may be a market segment that you're committed to helping. You really want to be of service of this kind of person, and maybe they're limited on funds. The general principle is that nobody ever says no for financial reasons. That's not my experience. One of the primary mistakes that practitioners make is they think about discounting their rates first, or they run a sale on rates, and it almost never, my experience, by the way, personally, is that it actually never, creates a rush to your door or something. Maybe in other businesses, like I know people, there's a acupuncturist I worked with and a Chinese herbalist, and he ran a bunch of Groupon ads and he got a ton of business in the door. The challenge is those are a kind of client who really don't want to spend the money that was necessary for their long-term health. They were looking for the $30 at a $60 initial intake session or whatever it was. And he really wants them on long-term herbs. The guy works magic with herbs. He's solved, I can't tell you how many lifelong problems I thought were just my system or just my metabolism or whatever through, herbs for a couple of weeks. And so he really wanted them in there for that. So Groupon ended up not working for him very well. But it certainly can with the appropriate preframes. Let's see. Yeah. Here's what I'll say. Will people pay that? Well, which people where? And for what? So anybody will pay any price, really, if the value perception is there. I know a guy, his entire business is he only works with people for 9 months and it's 50 grand and it's payment in full. And, how many of those people do you need, right? So rather than working at volume, you're working at depth. His coach only works for people a year at a time for 100 grand. He doesn't even use an agreement because they've given him $100,000 in advance. He doesn't work on payment plans. Now, I would still have an agreement. I think there's lots of things you need to have, which is why I give you, my agreement template, which has grown from a page to 5 pages over the last 10 years and been vetted by 3 different attorneys, is a really great agreement. It pretty much covers everything, but it's still occasionally I'll say, well, gosh, is that in the agreement? No, I need to add a paragraph. So, but in terms of price and volume and, there's lots of ways to look at it. The challenge is there's not nearly as many people who can pay $100,000 out of pocket as there are who can pay, $5,000. So it is a smaller market. That also means that your conversion rates will inherently be lower because if you're, talking to 20 people, how many of those are actually going to, it depends on where you live. Here in Silicon Valley, if you're, hanging out at the coffee shops outside of Google or Apple, maybe you're running into them every day. I don't know, but it's, but the idea that people can't pay a certain price or that, what I would say is that all you need to do is shift who you're looking to serve in terms of marketing and targeting them. I don't know if that answers all of your questions, James. You got some really great questions here. We might actually, I'm going to circle back to that. So having a sales system and using it, here's the trick about it. You don't want to just use any sales system. You want to use one that has these organizing principles. Well, these aren't organizing principles, but they're, what should I call them? Well, it needs to come from service and contribution. It needs to have a foundation of vision, possibility, and inquiry rather than manipulation, fear, and scarcity. I'm fundamentally against using fear, scarcity in sales. I'm also against using hypnosis in sales. I've actually written a strongly worded blog article about not using hypnosis in sales, which is pretty much the opposite of what, say Tony Robbins or Christopher Howard would teach you. They're, some of the stuff that they do in sales is what the pickup artists, have sort of morphed into here's how to close a deal with a woman, right? Horrible, horrible things. And people will not remember why. And then you'll have buyer's remorse. And that could be really bad in both contexts. And it should be clean enough that you can be transparent about your sales tactics and techniques with your prospective client. What does that mean? If they go, is that a sales tactic? You can say, sure it is. And here's how it serves you. Here's why I use it. You should be able to be transparent about it. If you don't feel comfortable being transparent about it, there's 2 things that are probably going on. One, it may not be ethical, so you should probably just dump it. The second thing is you may not understand it. You need to understand how it serves them, and that's a matter of framing and perspective, and that's fine. But more often than not, I find that it's the first group. You should probably just get rid of that tactic, because it's probably eventually going to do more harm than good. So those are the things you're going to look for, especially in a holistic business around sales. I could sum all this up as saying it needs to be clean. It just needs to be clean. People, when they're coming to somebody for help, they're feeling into you in a way. It's not like buying a house or, if you fall in love with the house, you're going to deal with the, weird mortgage broker. But when you're buying the service or you're buying outcomes or you're buying what what the outcomes make possible, and you're the guide, they need to feel like they can trust you. And they won't know. They won't say, well, he used that one tactic, so I don't trust him or her. What they'll do is they'll just say, it just doesn't feel right, because they won't have access to what's going on, really. Most people don't, sadly. So let's talk about evolutionary sales. Evolutionary sales are about 20 days. I think it's the second webinar in the future. The next one will be how to design your comprehensive offering and how to do your introductory talks. You can do that in any business. You can do it whether you are a fetishist, taking people to depths in BDSM that they've never been to before. You can do classes and courses and make sure that you just use the bookends. Or you can do it as a massage therapist or a chiropractor, or talking, demonstrating about what you do. It is the absolute bread and butter. It's also the fastest way to get prospective clients. In the future, we'll talk about marketing, lead times, and venues, all of that kind of thing. But evolutionary sales organizing principles. You're not closing a deal, you're opening a relationship. I'm not sure who decided to label it closing a deal. In our business, it's where things begin and not where they end. So, you really are opening a relationship. By the way, if you look at it this way, what's built into it is you're not going to shove that door closed. All right? You're going to gently open it. You're not selling your services. This is a difficult one for people to get how to integrate, but you really aren't. You're guiding them to sell themselves on their outcomes and what that makes possible. If you're trying to convince them that, your service or you're the guy or girl to help them, it's about you or it's about your service, then right away you're going to have some kind of polarity going on. But they don't have any conflict with their own outcomes. I mean, maybe they have some internal conflicts. They're scared. They don't know who they would be sometimes without that problem they've had for years, and that can certainly come up. Maybe they've got something else going on, or maybe they're married and there's a money issue in a relationship. There always is, by the way, even if they're wealthy. Even if it's you're always spending money on X, Y, or Z. Why aren't you like this? We'll talk about how to handle that, by the way. But you're selling them. You're helping them sell themselves. So, and this is all done in great detail in the evolutionary sales system. These are just the principles. And then all you need to do is demonstrate competence with your congruence and the cogency of your offering. Cogency is, I think Ryan would call it one of my highfalutin words, but I haven't been able to find another word to replace it. So I always have to define it. It just means that it's intellectually compelling. I go, that really makes sense. Now that's sort of the opposite of, it's like, people talk about people buying for emotional reasons and justifying with logic. I disagree. In fact, that's where the hypnotic sales ideas come in. What I want them to do is look at the whiteboard and go, this makes sense. It's just, and then them signing up is mostly a formality, because I've spent, an hour asking them what they want, how they would know when they had it and what's been stopping them. And then I spend an hour demonstrating how specifically we'll go about resolving that or getting that for them or guiding them to that place. And then, they know at the end whether or not it's a fit. Now, if that's some sort of hands-on thing, demonstrating your competence will include, again, that additional step, that additional session. There's a massage therapist I see, and I see him and I pay his exorbitant rates because he can touch my feet, and he was able to touch them the first time, and I didn't even warn him. Normally people can't touch my feet. It's an odd thing. I grew up in a shoe store, so I never went barefoot as a child. I never really developed calluses on my feet. It's a little-known piece of McClain trivia, right? I grew up in a mall, with little Star Wars shoes on. At the time, Star Wars shoes were coming out. Anyway. And kangaroos. Does anybody remember roos? A little pocket on the tongue? Okay. So, so all you need to do is demonstrate competence. So that's going to look a few different ways. That could be you explaining things to them. The challenge I had with the Chinese herbalist was he would say, just take this. Now, that I guess works with a lot of people, but I wanted more information. I wanted to be educated. And if you do that, if you explain why, sometimes I explain how I'll go about resolving fear for somebody in one session that they've lived with all of their life. But I don't do it for them. This isn't about demonstrating. This isn't about a free coaching session or a free, now do you charge, like coach, I would advise not to charge for an exploratory session, although it's debatable in some instances. But as a body worker, would you charge? Absolutely. But they just need to have the understanding that you'll be discussing an extended program after they wake up from the massage and have their tea and all that good stuff. And the final principle is that you need to embody the fact that the money is secondary. There's lots of little ways that we do that in evolutionary sales. One is you don't talk about money until the appropriate time. People want to know how much you charge. I decline to answer, but I tell them why. Is it a sales tactic? Sure. But I explain to them why, and it's pretty much the same language that's on my website in the frequently asked questions page. As a side note, your frequently asked questions page on your website is the most powerful and least used pre-sales tool. Feel free to look at evolveco.com to look at mine, and feel free to borrow from it. Don't just copy and paste, but feel free to borrow heavily. Another is that, if I don't care about them giving me money that day. I do care about a signature on the agreement, but I don't care about the money. The money will figure itself out before the first session. I care about them scheduling their first session and signing the agreement, and not in that order. Signing the agreement and then scheduling their first session. Right? Now, why? First of all, they notice that that's different than most people. A lot of people have been trained to say, bring your checkbook and your calendar, and it's whatever. I had somebody do that to me. I laughed at them. Thought it was hilarious. He was somebody I knew well, so I sort of shrugged it off. If it was somebody I was seeking out for services, though, seriously, I probably would have shied away from them. Not because they weren't worth it, but because I would feel like their attention was in the wrong place. But it could show up, in other ways as well. But here's the thing. It's easy to stop payment on a check or to change your mind about a credit card and do a chargeback. A little more difficult to rescind a signature from a 5-page agreement that's, has a ironclad alternative dispute resolution clause in it language has been tested up to the Supreme Court. It's more difficult to pull your signature back from that. What's important is the work, and the work is where the attention should be. Okay, questions about that? I know you didn't see the system, but those are the principles around which the system is designed. I came up with the principles first, and then organically design the system. By the way, the system that you'll learn in a few weeks, what happened was I signed up 50 clients in a row at one point to a 6-month agreement. They all said yes. And at that point, I thought, well, I should probably figure out what I'm doing. So I started to model myself. What are the things I always say? What are the steps I always take? Because my results weren't that great in the beginning. And I struggled a lot, ran into a lot of walls, and nobody was teaching practitioners how to build a business. And even though I had been a field sales trainer for Anthony Robbins and Associates, after that, trying to hang my coaching plank out at 25, hating sales, I realized I needed to learn sales. And I gritted my teeth and went into the belly of the beast and worked for Anthony Robbins, selling and training the power to influence sales training, which is a grueling way to learn sales. You go into car dealerships, mortgage brokerages, real estate, agencies, and you try to sell them a sales course. It's just, brutal. How do you do that? By doing a free talk, right? I mean, by the way, every organization, if you look at, talking about that's the bread and butter. Landmark Education, what do? They give a free talk. What does Tony Robbins do? He gives a free talk. Or his sales reps give a free talk. What does Christopher Howard do? He gives you a free weekend, and then he signs you up for a $12,000 or whatever or something, right? But he gives a free weekend, it's providing free accessible value. What do? Well, we do talks. You can do webinars, if you're using good technology. I don't recommend teleseminars, by the way. for selling services. They're fine for selling courses or products, but they're not ideal for selling services. We don't have time for this today. That's going to be in the next webinar. How to write talks so that they essentially write themselves. Just cycle through 4 learning styles. That'll be in the next webinar. I had to cut it this morning, just realizing that we weren't going to be able to have time. Here are the components again, and one organizing principle: be a living example of the work that you do. Some people might just call it integrity, by the way, but we're not going to use that morally laden word. Have a comprehensive offering or series of sessions. Have a sales system and use it. Have formalized referral systems. Oh, so there's 2. One is, I just pay people for referrals. The other is I write referrals into the agreement that they're going to refer 2 people to me if they're satisfied with the work, or they're, I don't know if it says satisfied or if they can't remember what it says. That's not really something, by the way, you can hold someone accountable to. It's not like you can, rap them on the knuckles for not referring people to you. So, but it is there to put their mind around the fact that, that's how you run your business. And sometimes they'll come, after the first month, they're referring people to you. Or sometimes, at the end, I had a guy who was a real estate agent. He, brought his day timer. He had those 2 names for me. He knew it was going to be coming in the exit survey. And as a side note, don't have people, train people around how to refer people to you. Here's the most effective way to have people refer people to you. Have them get their permission to give you their contact information. So when he goes, oh, I got this client and they really use your service, you should be hearing from them. You won't. You won't. They might lose your information. They get overwhelmed. They get scared. They get busy, whatever. Or, they keep putting it off. Get their permission to give me their contact information. I handle the rest. If you really want to be of service, that's how you should do it anyway. The client shouldn't have to overcome a bunch of stuff to talk to you. And then you contact them within 24 hours. And that is a critical piece. We'll talk about that when we talk about the sales system. You can also do videos, podcasts. I've got a bunch of videos on my site that are just me running through PowerPoint, but it's not a webinar. It's, I say hi, and then I go through a bunch of content. I go through a bunch of distinctions. That all, by the way, there's tons of articles up there, dating back. I should just sent someone an article, and it's, from 2005. I went, good Lord, and a lot of them aren't even published on there. I've unpublished a lot of them because the writing was too green 15 years ago. But what that does is it builds search engine optimization. First of all, it's the only way to build true quality search engine optimization is to have quality content that, is rich in keywords, but it should be relevant to what you're doing. But also it demonstrates competence. People get a sense that you know what you're doing. Now, it can be anything. It can be about dating. It could be about sex. It could be about nutrition. It could be about, I never know what I'm going to write about. It's just always, something different. It could be about spirituality or God, or it could be anything. But it's important that you have content up there for those 2 reasons. It also builds over time. I didn't have hundreds of articles up there in 2005. I had a half dozen. So just give yourself some grace around that. It takes time to build the body of work. Okay. Questions? Yes, you'll be getting today's recording. Anybody who registered for today gets the recording. You'll get an MP4 as well as an MP3 if you like, so you can listen to it in the car or what have you. You'll also get the PowerPoints. PowerPoints, of course, are not to be used without my permission. I had somebody take the PowerPoint. They're like, "This is great. Can I have it?" I said, "Sure." And she let the whole thing the next week for somebody, and I just thought that was hilarious. I wouldn't even dream of that. But the courage, it's great. Oh, the stories I have. Any other questions? Yeah, great. We should talk, James. This is fantastic. You've got so much. This is. It's really, really great. Okay. Anybody have any questions about anything that we've covered so far before I get into what's coming up and talk a little bit about the course? Probably have about 10 more minutes, by the way, just to warn you. I'll let you guys send in questions if you think of them. Feel free to, if something pops up, go ahead. So here's what's coming up. This, by the way, is in support of the course, of course, but there's tons of, if you got anything out of today, let me just say this is the highest level, and we'll go into much greater detail. Here are the upcoming webinars. Tuesday, February 24th. Sorry, that'll be at noon also. We will discuss how to write talks and how to design an offering, a comprehensive offering. Friday, March 6th, I'll lay out the evolutionary sales system, which really is you get a prospect, what do you do? And to have it be, my conversion rate hovers around 90%, which is for a 6-month program. It's a pretty big deal. Yours, if you follow it, there's some real subtle things that we've discovered, including, just your level of certainty or belief in your own offering that can impact your results. And it could just be a slight voice tone in the process, or I've seen 400 clients now through a 6-month program. So I'm actually surprised and shocked if somebody doesn't sign up. I'm like, oh, really? Well, let's say more about that. And that kind of relaxed confidence really communicates, especially in person. So there's some things that first there's just technical skill, like what do you say when, and you got all the material for that. But then there's making it natural, making it your own while sticking true to the actual structure of the system. But you can, of course, alter certain things. But some of it, the language I've honed over 15 years. So, or at least 13 years. So it's worth starting there. One of my rules is to learn the rule, what is my rule? Learn the rules so that you can then break them and understand them, so that you can then break them with some skill and artistry. You should be able to argue compellingly for the way it is traditionally, so that you can then go ahead and be an artist about how you break the rules. Friday, March 13th, 1 month from now, will be a Troubleshoot Your Practice Day. It'll be an hour. You can bring any questions you have about anything. Bizarre client interaction, rates, this thing that you don't understand about evolutionary sales, anything. I love your questions, and I've pretty much seen it all at this point. So, I want you to bring your questions. And then March 24th, we'll do another one of those. And then finally on Friday, April 3rd, these are all at noon, by the way. That's what happens when I rewrite the whole thing the morning of. We'll revisit the beliefs, Your Future in Invisible Ink, that had to get canceled because I had some structural problems with my health. Not as bad as falling down the escalator like I did the other day, but I had some. I just was unable to pull it off. But we do have time to circle back to it. So those are upcoming webinars. You'll get this in an email from me as well, by the way. So don't worry about getting them all done right now. And you'll, of course, get the video. Here's the course. This is the upcoming course. It starts April 18th and 19th. All these dates are Saturday and Sunday, by the way, unless there's an error here. But they're all Saturday and Sunday. They're all from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Just when I go from 10 a.m. to 8 or 9 p.m., I get mutinies. So we're going from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. There'll be a generous lunch break. It's an hour and a half lunch, and there's a half hour movement. Half hour of, it's like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes there of movement. And there's also, of course, an hour dinner break. No, there's not, because it's 6 p.m. You're just set free. So May 16th and 17th. So April 18th and 19th, we're going to talk about beliefs, emotions, self-esteem. If any of you were on my shame webinars, we did 3 angles on shame. One was just parental imprints or from authority figures. Another was, self-acceptance and looking at self-acceptance. I have it that it's impossible for someone else to shame you. Why? Because you have to agree with them to feel the shame. But that's an adult conversation. That's not a child conversation. It's getting something from their parents, and child is inherently externally validated. They're looking for approval. That's part of their developmental path. As adults, we're looking to evolve beyond that, which is then why we go right into self-esteem. Self-esteem is probably the only thing I feel comfortable calling myself an expert in. And I've seen PhDs write books that are they turn self-esteem upside down. They've got it completely wrong-headed. They end up going into something called other esteem. I call it. It's not self-esteem at all. But it's your beliefs. Your beliefs are really insidious. It could show up like, I don't think people are going to pay this much, and so you keep your rates low, or it could be about the value of your offering, or it could be any number of things. But the problem is most people don't have them as beliefs. They have it as that's the way the world is. So we want to make sure that you have access to noticing them in your language. Where it shows up most is money and spirituality are somehow in conflict, which is one of the on this thing I was unable to get to. There's 6 mistakes, and I'll just send you an article on it that they make. The first 3 are philosophical. The second 3 are business structures, mechanical. So we're going to address all that in the first weekend. It's probably the area in which I'm most different than any other person you're going to come along who's teaching business stuff. It's like, why are we dedicating a whole weekend to emotions and self-esteem and beliefs? Well, we should probably dedicate 2. Why are we only dedicating 1? I don't know. Should we add 1? But usually people are thinking the other way around. Like, can we just get to the business stuff? Sure. And then you design a talk, and we haven't looked at fear or your beliefs in yourself or your level of self-worth you have going into that talk. And for some reason, you just don't want to schedule your talk. And then your business never gets off the ground. So we have to start with the emotional stuff. It's operating in the background all the time anyway. Can you do it without it? Yes, much more difficult for you. So it actually, even though it's like, well, we're spending all that time on it. Yes, you end up spending less time though building your business because you get a lot of the emotional stuff out of the way, especially the beliefs around money and spirituality, which just aren't, they don't hold up well to examination, I'll say. May 16th and 17th is all about designing your offering. It seems to have been the most confronting thing for people is to design a comprehensive offering. And I've worked with enough people now, or, rather than spending an afternoon on it, or a few hours and then sending you home, we're going to spend a whole weekend on it. And another way to think about this is what you're selling. And then June 13th and 14th will be how to sell it. It'll be evolutionary sales. And, the way I'm thinking about it now is to sell without, quote, selling. Like nobody ever thinks they're being sold. And I asked the question at the beginning because I don't want you to go click a buy now button. I want us to talk about whether or not the course is a fit for you. Right? There's no way currently that you can just buy the course, by the way. There just isn't, but without talking to me first. But you'll get asked if you come to the course, did it feel like you were sold? And I've never had anybody say yes. It felt like I was being sold. It's just not that way. It's Aikido, not Taekwondo, is a physical metaphor for it. And then July 11th and 12th will be presenting and introductory workshops, a little bit of presentation skills, have you actually design a couple of talks. If you've got 2, you can, do those talks each month. Whether we talk about marketing copy or not will be largely how much Ryan reins me in. That's we could add a whole weekend on that, certainly. You will get some examples and some structures in the manual. Currently the manual for the course is 90 pages. It will likely grow a little bit, especially if, as I should, we should add the PowerPoint. That's not including PowerPoint slides, by the way. There's no cheating. It's a 90-page manual, just to be clear. And then August 8th and 9th, we're going to put it all together. And this may be the most important but least emphasized kind of module, which is where you come, whatever it is that you need to still figure out, or I'll say something in the whole thing. I remember I went to 3 Power to Influence workshops before the system actually made sense to me. It was a weekend. It was 12 hours a day. It's Tony Robbins, of course, style. So it's 12 hours a day. And I kid you not. And it was because the trainer anchored it on the floor. He went, step one was this. And then he would move one foot to his left and he'd go in step two. And the whole thing, like, for me, I actually finally understood the sales system the third time I went to the course. So, by the way, that's one of the reasons this is taught over several months, not in a couple of weekends. There's just no way that you could integrate it. There's also going to be interwoven webinars. So you'll have 2 webinars in between each weekend to help you integrate with the material that's included with the course, where you can ask anything or share something, or I'll just go into greater depth with the distinctions or whatever would serve the group. I will always be on those calls. I will always be on those calls. Nobody else will run those calls. Ryan may be there with me, or somebody else may be there with me, or an assistant, but I'll be running the calls. The promise of the course is that you'll have everything you need to build a 6-figure practice. Everything, practically turnkey, with a little bit of tweaking for those of you who are doing hands-on work, but you'll have everything that you need. And the tweaking happens in the course, by the way. It's not that there's a flowchart for evolutionary sales, but I'll give you flowcharts for other businesses as well in the manual so that you can see that there's just a little bit of modification that needs to occur. What's the tuition for the course? Normally, actually, in the past, I've just not talked about money, even about courses. Like, well, schedule a call with me. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because I think it's, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you. It's $39.97 if it's paid in full. You get a few $100s off if you pay in full. If you want or need a payment plan, it's $1,000 to get you registered. And then it's 5 monthly payments of $659.40, and it ends up being $42.97. A little bit cheaper than working with me one-on-one. It's also about half as much as the closest other styled person out there teaching practitioners how to build businesses. I think $8,000 is the one I've noticed the most. So that's all there. If you need some other payment plan, I'm pretty easy to talk to you about that, and I have you design your own, because I'd rather you commit to something that you design. You know your finances, I don't, and we can have that conversation. But if you're interested in the course, then here's why I told you how much it costs. If you sign one additional client to a 6-month program, or 2 to a 3-month program, the course pays for itself. So you'd be silly to not take it. So that's why I'm telling you how much it costs for that. I'm doing an outcome elicitation first. But you can't register for the course until you do an outcome elicitation. So if you want to talk to me about the course, or just talk to me about your business, there's 2 ways to contact me. First, you can go to, we're going to change this to healers.evolveco.com. At first, we thought this was going to be strictly for sexual healers. It just hasn't felt right. But for today, you go to sex.evolve-co.com. If you want to contact me directly, if you go there, by the way, pretty much the whole site's about the course. So you can just go there and look over the curriculum. The curriculum is in greater detail about the weekends. There's a frequently asked questions page. It's not complete finished, but it's getting there. The other way is, of course, to contact me through evolveco.com without the sex part. And it's in white, so it won't let me. Oh, great. It shows up because it's a link. Good. So in the chat window, there's, evolveco.com, contact form, and the site for the course, which is currently sex.evolveco.com. No, hang on a second. That link is incorrect. Okay. That's the course. And they're both wrong. No, they're not. Not my area. No, actually it is kind of my area. I'm sort of a geek. Okay. Good Lord. One of those will work. All right, one more time, just for shits and giggles. There we go. Yay, success. Okay. Second one's just a contact form. And we'll have a conversation about your business, talk about the course, see what you want to get out of the course. If it's not a fit for you, then I tell you that. It's funny. I got a client one time. I didn't know this because I just didn't know it. He came to my office and I said, you don't actually need to work with me. After we did the exploratory session, I said, what you need to do is go do a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. And he goes, well, I want to work with you. And I said, okay. I mean, it's donation based. Like you wouldn't necessarily have to pay anything, right? Well, so he signed up with me for 6 months. And we did great work. And, he's we've stayed in touch. This was several years ago. And I personally like the guy. And he's not a close friend, but we're friends. And I, because I have a weird relationship to birthdays, and because my mother's birthday is so soon after mine, yeah, I've done about 9 or 10 days. I'm going to keep going with the story real quick, but I decided to tell people if they wanted to get me a gift to write my mother an email expressing how I had positively impacted their life. And I set up an email account and I gave her the password on her birthday, which is 8 or 9 days after mine. And I read them first to make sure there was no crazies. I didn't have to delete any, thankfully. But he told that story and he said that that's why he signed up with me, because I told him that he didn't need my service and that he should just go do a meditation course. And it built a level of trust that I could have, never predicted it trusted. It built. Now, it's not a strategy. I wouldn't say add that into the system to tell everybody they should just go do something else. But it is, when you're just telling the truth, when you're authentic and your attention's not on the money, when it's about them and the money is secondary, it comes out in all sorts of interesting ways. So we're way over time. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to contribute to you. I hope I see you on the next one. Whenever I said it is when it'll be. You'll get an email with those dates. And if you, I probably don't have time to speak with anybody until at least Sunday, but if any of you have any questions, I can send you a quick email back. Oh, shoot. No, right. Messaging you about emotional aspects. And, I think we've mostly covered that a little bit when I was talking about why we start with that in module 1 of the course, emotions and self-esteem. There's a bunch of stuff around self-esteem though. It's your immune system for business or for life really, but you bounce back faster. So if you have a strong immune system, you get over the cold quickly. Something happens in business, you have high self-esteem, and I've added to the body of work and talk about, where your validation is, external or internal, whether or not you make it practical or personal, and how that maps across to those two things. And of course, since I'm such a geek, I've developed a 4-quadrant system for self-esteem. None of that really matters. What's important is that there's a bunch of distinctions where, I have found that self-esteem is probably the most fundamental aspect of anything in terms of how you orient your mind. And it's defined in a particular way I use a definition that is very different than what's mostly known out there. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute to you. Thanks for being on the call. Thanks for your questions. James will be in touch. And if there are no other questions, have a fantastic day. And I look forward to seeing you all in about 10 days.